Shalom, Mubaraka, Mishpaka, peace and blessings, family. This is a Patreon slideshow presentation. This is a book called Britain, The Key to World History, page 17 and 18. It says, as far as Bible geography is concerned, it appears that the main person responsible for its misinterpretation was Constantine the Great, who had definite motives from transferring the arena of Jewish history and that of Christ, we know he didn't exist, to another region altogether. So they said Constantine the Great is who transferred biblical territory from one region to another, right? Let's continue reading. He used Christianity as a valuable political asset, selected the East as his empire, and with Eusebius, Jerome, and others invented the present Palestine. He invented Palestine, guys. Just like I stated in Migration Series 2, Flavius Dalmatius, the half-brother of Emperor Constantine, commissioned an anonymous author to create Itinerarium Bergenalese, the first ever document calling the Levant the Holy Land. This was in 333 AD. Remember, 333. That's a very symbolic number for both the Masonic world and the spiritual world. 3 is a number of foundation. 3 is a number of new beginnings. Now, that's less than a decade after the Council of Nicaea. Before that, it was known that the Holy Land was in Atlantis or America. Three 333, both 333 AD and 333 BC are two very important times, because in 333 BC, Alexander the Great conquered the real Jerusalem and took our documents over there to the east, which changed the course of history from that point on. 333 AD, the Middle East became Israel, what we call Israel. So 333 is new beginnings. Remember that. Throughout history has always been new beginnings. Let's go to the bottom. It says, if this be correct, the present-day Jews who make a historical claim to Palestine are utterly wide of the mark. So they're not even close. The Jewish people who claim that that's the land, they're not even close. But look what it says. That's what it says on the next page. Yet that mythology all points unhesitantly to the earliest civilization as occurring in the Atlantic regions and not at all in the Mediterranean or Asia Minor. Above all, the history of the Old Testament is the history of Atlantis. The history of the Old Testament is the history of Atlantis. Where is Atlantis? Where is Atlantis, right? Where is Atlantis? Look on this map. This map got North and South America, and it says Atlantis Insula, meaning the island of Atlantis. Let me tell you something. The Americas is so big. It's funny that they call it an island when it's really the largest landmass on Earth, right? But the Americas are so big that if you're coming from anywhere on Earth, if you go east and west and you keep going, you will reach the Americas. From any point on Earth, from the Middle East, from Africa, from Europe, from Australia, if you go east or west continuously, you will eventually end up in America. So to say that they didn't know about this landmass is ridiculous. They knew about it. Everybody has always known about the Americas because, like I said, it's the easiest accessible place on Earth. All you have to do is keep going west and you'll get there. All you have to do is keep going east and you'll get there, right? It's the most easiest accessible continent. Africa, you might mess up and go to Europe, right? You might even mess up and go below Africa, end up in Australia, right? Let's say you're trying to go to Asia, you might end up in Indonesia, you might end up in Australia. But if you're trying to go to the Americas, all you have to do is go west or east. You're not gonna miss it. It's the easiest place to get to. It's always been the easiest place to get to. And they're gonna lie to you and say nobody knew about this landmass for the entirety of human history. That is a lie. And we have to stop believing it. We have to stop promoting it. These are the 7 kingdoms of Atlantis. Number 1, Babylon. That's in the Quebec, New England, Acadia region. Number 2, Medo-Persia, which is right next to that, around the Toronto area. Number 3, Assyria. Started out in the Florida, Georgia, South Carolina area, spread all the way northwest to Lebanon. Number 4, Hamath. Hamath was right north of Lebanon. Number 5, Canaan, also known as the land of Israel, spread all the way from the Great Sea to the Euphrates or the Mississippi River. Number 6, Mizraim, west to east from the Colorado to the Mississippi, north to south from the Colorado all the way down to the southern tip of the Andes. And number 7, Ethiopia, aka Kush. It started off on the Gihon River, which is the South Atlantic, and spread throughout South America and spread east into Africa from West Africa all the way up to modern Ethiopia, also known as Aksum or Abyssinia. Now look at this. This is history they didn't tell you in school. All right. In circa 100 BCE, Diodorus Siculus of Rome talked about the Phoenicians of Carthage and learned about America, calling it the land of the gods. Diodorus Siculus describes America circa 100 BCE. Now this is in a book, and the book cost $200. It's about how the Greeks did in fact come to America. And Homer's Odyssey, which is a very, very important piece of Greco-Roman literature, states very specifically that they did in fact come to the Americas. Translated from the Greek, far out off the African coast there is an island remarkable for its size, which as it lies in the ocean to the west has a distance equal to the trip of some days from Libya. And generally speaking, this island has such a mild climate that most of the year produces a lot of fruits from the trees and other seasonal fruits. Therefore, with its excessive wealth, it looks like it's been created from the very beginning as an abode of gods, so to speak, and not humans. This is because the Americas are the best place to live on the earth. Why do you think out of all places, when you go to Asia, you're going to see Asians? When you go to Africa, you're going to see Africans. When you go to Europe, you're going to see Europeans. But if you go to America, you're going to see all races. You're going to see all kindreds, all peoples, all languages. Why is that? Because everybody wants a piece of this. This is the best land to ever exist. It has the best climate, the best foods, and everything that America could possibly offer. They wanted this land. And America is not that far from the east. Did you know Brazil is closer to Africa? Listen to what I'm about to say. Brazil is closer to Africa than it is to Brazil. I'm going to repeat. Brazil is closer to Africa than it is to Brazil. Because Brazil is such a huge country. It's bigger than the span from Brazil to Africa. It's bigger than the South Atlantic. So, America is not even that far from the east. There's been trade. There's been all kinds of things. Do not underestimate the ancestors. They were very intelligent. They'll tell you that, we were cavemen and we learned all this stuff and got smarter and smarter, but that's not true. In history class, they told us history repeats itself, right? If history repeats itself, then that's a contradiction to whatever you're teaching me, because you're teaching me that we started out as cavemen. Then, like thousands and thousands and thousands of years later, we discovered our agriculture, and thousands of thousands and thousands. Then we discovered civilization. Then thousands and thousands and thousands of years later, then we had empires. Then thousands and thousands and thousands of years later, now here we are today, and we just got better and better. No, that's not how it happened. If history repeats itself, then there were advanced times in the past just like there are today. And if there were advanced times in the past just like there are today, there was trade worldwide at one point just like there is today. We're not going to sit up here and say, oh, they were dumb. No, they were not dumb. They knew more than you in a lot of places. Diodorus Siculus, who flourished 3/4 of a century before the Christian era, furnished a somewhat detailed account of a great island in the Atlantic Ocean west of Africa. In the second chapter of the 5th book of his historical library, he says that the opposite to Africa lies a very great country in the vast ocean, of many days' sail from Libya westward, which was unknown for a long time because of its remote situation, that it was finally discovered accidentally by some Phoenicians sailing along the west coast of Africa, who were prevented from landing and driven far to the west by violent storms, and that they found a new country rich in fauna and flora, and everything suitable for the wants of man. Now pay attention to how they just describe America, right? The soil here is very fruitful, a great part whereof is mountainous, that's the west, but much likewise champaign, which is the most sweet and pleasant part of all the rest, for it is watered with several navigable rivers. All right, the Americas have so many rivers, right? Colorado, Mississippi, Amazon, etc. Beautified with many gardens of pleasure, planted with diverse sorts of trees and abundant orchards, interlaced with the currents of sweet water. Sweet water, pay attention to that part. That means there's a lot of natural springs from the earth, minerals in the water. You know what I'm saying? And pay attention to how Moses made water sweet by putting agave inside of the water. The agave sweetened the water, right? So when you think of sweet waters, you got to think about scripture, man. You got to think about scripture, and it's describing a land that say got sweet waters, right? All right, pay attention. The towns are adorned with stately buildings and banqueted houses up and down, pleasantly situated in their gardens and orchards. Their towns are adorned with stately buildings and banqueted houses up and down, pleasantly situated in their gardens and orchards, and here they recreate themselves in summertime and in places accommodated for pleasure and delight. So we even see that the American people had very beautiful architecture, right? They didn't just live in teepees and huts like they tell you. They lived in castles. I've been trying to explain to people that the Americas had the best buildings, bruh. If you think we could build pyramids, why don't you think we could build a castle, bruh? A pyramid takes so much more mathematics, so much more work and labor than a castle. We had castles over here. We had dungeons. We had beautiful cities. We had empires, all that stuff. The 7 kingdoms of Atlantis. Come on, man. We had all that, bro. All that was over here, bro. You have to understand that every single thing they taught you in school was utter bull. You wasted 12 years of your life, and it wasn't your fault. They forced you into that stuff, bro. They forced you to learn regurgitated bullish. Now, anyway, The mountainous part of the country is clothed with many large woods. Pay attention to that part. Large woods. The mountainous part. What is that? The Holy Land, right? We talking Gilead. We talking Bashan. We talking Lebanon. We talking about Japhia. We talking about the land of the Philistines, right? Right? Come on, man. Come on, man. We talking about the land of the holy people, right? They describe in your land, they said large woods. Where's the largest trees on earth? The largest trees on earth is in California, one of the most mountainous states in America. California is pretty much all mountain. The only place that is flat is in Central Valley, which at one point was covered in water. But California is pretty much all mountain, bro. And it got the largest trees on earth. All manner of fruit trees, bro. They look at California. California is making most of our fruit, bro, that we eat. That's the land of Asher and Zebulun, bro. It's described. They've been there. They've done that. They know what this land looks like. They've been talking about it. They've been trying to get it for so long. The Roman Empire, their goal for about 2,000 years was to take America, but they couldn't because America was so powerful. Then they sent Christopher Columbus over there, and he started taking slaves, and then eventually they started sending spies, which they call conquistadors, to spy out the land. And then when they got record of the land, they wrote it in their books. This tribe behaves this way. This tribe looks like this. This tribe does this. And guess what? Then they took America. They had to plan this shit out because they knew that the Americas were the best land on earth. And ever since Constantine, they've been trying to take this land. And they succeeded. So right here in the book, they talking about our place. They talking about our land. They know that this is the best land. Now, anyway. By the way, if you want to see many books just like this, please subscribe to my Patreon. Like I told you, nobody regrets getting on my Patreon. Nobody gets on my Patreon and complains, because my Patreon is the best Patreon. Not even trying to be prideful, but I do have the best Patreon. It's a lot of information you can take in from my Patreon. But anyway, and for the greater delight and diversion of people in these mountains, they ever and anon open themselves into pleasant valleys, watered with fountains of refreshing springs. And indeed, the whole island abounds with springs of sweet water, whence the inhabitants not only reap pleasure and delight, but improve in health and strength of body. Now, look, hold up. They just described the Holy Land perfectly. Because there's a scripture in Deuteronomy that literally describes the Holy Land just like what I just read. And for the greater delight and diversion of people in these mountains, they ever anon open themselves into pleasant vales, watered with fountains and refreshing springs. And indeed, the whole island abounds with springs of sweet water, whence the inhabitants not only reap pleasure and delight, but also improve in health and strength of body. When we go into the book of Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 7, this is how Yahuwah described our land, that mountainous land, right? It says, "For Yahuwah thy Allah bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, and of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills." Didn't it say vales? Didn't it say it's mountainous? Didn't it say have those springs? Look, springing out of depths. That's talking about the springs. The land is full of springs, man. And what do we know about springing water? It has a high mineral content. What do we know about the Native Americans? You can Google this. The Native Americans, which were our people, like to jump in the springs and in the rivers to heal their body, because those minerals will absorb into the skin and it'll go into the bloodstream and they'll get healed of any sickness. Just like in scripture, when the Syrian with the leprosy came to Elisha and said, "Cure me, please," he just said, "Dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River." He was cured from his leprosy. It's talking about basically a land that had healing waters. Healing waters. You know, the most healing waters are found in Western North America. And in the Old Testament, the Tanakh even says that the Jordan River was a healing river. And it just says that America had healing waters because it says, whence the inhabitants not only reap pleasure and delight, but improve their health and strength of body. It's talking about the springs and the waters that are in this land. And it continues to describe the Holy Land because look what it says right here. There you may have game enough in hunting all sorts of wild beasts, of which there is such plenty that in their feasts there is nothing wanting, either as to pomp or to delight. The adjoining sea furnished them plentifully with fish, for the ocean there is naturally abounds with all sorts. So it says the ocean next to the western part, which is the mountainous part, is full of all fish, just like the Pacific Ocean. Come on, guys. And then on top of that, it says this land you may find all sorts of wild beasts. The Holy Land has 7 clean beasts. We're talking about buffaloes. We're talking about mountain goats. We're talking about the fastest animal on earth, which is the pronghorn, right? We're talking about the wild sheep, right? We're talking about the elk. We're talking about the deer. We're talking about the moose. All these are clean beasts and they're found in the Holy Land. And you can hunt as much as you want. You can eat as much as you want. The food will overflow out of your mouth because you'll still have more left over in the Holy Land. Not in Africa, not in the Middle East, in America, guys. This is the truth. Now look, watch them describe the climate. The air and the climate of this island is very mild and healthful, so that the trees bear fruit, and other things that are produced there are fresh and beautiful, most part of the year, so that this island for excellency in all respects seems rather to be the residence of some of the gods rather than of man. So Diodorus Achilles is saying that America seems like it should be a place where the gods live, not men. Why is that area so good? Gods should live there. Guess what? Who are the gods of earth? Israel. Period. The Phoenicians, who are Tyre and Zidon, didn't discover America. They came from America as seafaring peoples. And this is a generous fact that people must understand, and I'm going to present it more in my future videos. Look at this old newspaper. Atlantis found in 1492. I read with much interest the article on the lost continent of Atlantis. This and numerous others about Atlantis only serve to fix more firmly in mind the idea that the continent supposed by the ancients to exist beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is the area between Spain and Morocco, was found by Columbus in 1492. Columbus, instead of discovering the new route to India, found Atlantis instead. It was always known that the Tanakh came from, not only the Tanakh, but even the cuneiform tablets of Babylon and Assyria, the Epic of Gilgamesh and more, came from the 7 kingdoms of Atlantis. And the stuff is very simple, bro. The nation of Israel is one of the 7 kingdoms of Atlantis. And we have to understand this, man. We have to really understand this. The kingdom of science, literary utopianism, and the British education, 1612 to 1870. Now, this is very important to understand. We have to read this book. Got some good knowledge in it. In the middle paragraph, each nation, including the Indians of Atlantis, visited every year. The Western Hemisphere Indians once had a high culture They are primitive only in consequence of the great wars and subsequent flood that took away their culture, forcing them to make a simplest of adaptations to nature. Go to the bottom paragraph. It says, but a real Atlantis existed. Great Atlantis, powerful before Ben Salam became important. The real Atlantis that you call America. They tell you that Atlantis is America. In the book called Antiquities of the Cherokee Indians, we can find many interesting things. This is the oral traditions of the Hebrewistic Indian tribes, right? Certain American Indian tribes had Hebrewistic practices. They practiced Hebrewisms just like certain tribes in Africa practice Hebrewisms. Therefore, if they had no contact with any other people who were holding a Bible in their hand and they were just randomly practicing Hebrew stuff, it would only be a logical assertion that these are indeed the descendants of the children of Israel. So anyway, this is what a certain explorer, or maybe spy, I should say, had to say about the Cherokees, because he heard the oral tradition that they gave. Mr. Boudinot, speaking of the Indians, said, "It is said among their principal or beloved men that they have it handed down from their ancestors that the book which the white people have was once theirs. That while they had it, they prospered exceedingly, but that white people bought it of them and learned many things from it." Let's make some observations real quick. What is that book? That book is called the Scriptures, specifically the Tanakh, the Old Testament, which they call the Bible or the Hebrew Bible. The Indians said that the white man got that book from the Indians or the Israelites. Yes, because Alexander the Great came to America, took Jerusalem by force, and seized all the documents found in the temple. Brought back 100 or so documents to the Middle East, well, specifically to Macedonia, and then eventually into the Library of Alexandria. People bought copies of the book from the Levant, and then the Idumeans found them and then claimed it as their history and became the first fake Jews. But anyway, yes, the white man did indeed take the scriptures from the Indians or the American Aboriginals, who are the Israelites, just shortly after the time of Joel. Very shortly after the time of Joel. Now, anyway, and it says, while the Indians lost credit, offended the Great Spirit, and suffered exceedingly from the neighboring nations. What does that sound like? Deuteronomy 28. Once we offended Yah by breaking his commandments, we suffered greatly, right? We were led out of our land. Where did we go? Well, look what the Indians had to say. That the Great Spirit took pity on them and directed them to this country, that on their way they came to a great river which they could not pass, where God dried up the waters, and they passed over dry shod. So understand this. First thing first, the Tanakh was really written by the Indians, which were the Israelites. This is what the Indians said. The second thing is that the Indians, which were specifically the East Coast Indians, these are the East Coast Indians because they're Cherokee, which are East Coast tribe, angered Yah, and for that they were sent out of the Holy Land. And then you have to understand that the Indians had to cross a great river. What was that great river? That great river was the Mississippi River, and I'm going to explain it further on, which Yah dried up for them to get to their current habitation. Yah dried up the great river so all the Israelites could leave the Holy Land and get to the areas that they are today. If you look at where most black people are today, they are mostly in Mississippi, they're mostly in Florida, they're mostly in Georgia, they're mostly in Texas, they're mostly in Louisiana, they're mostly in North and South Carolina, New York, Pennsylvania, etc. Most of those places which I named, everything except for Texas and Louisiana, is east of the Mississippi River, right? Our people do not live in great quantities in the West Coast. They do not live in great quantities in the West Coast. Just about 3 or 4 cities in the West Coast can you find the children of Israel. So people think that because the book of Esdras, which was written in Greek by our oppressors, says that during the Assyrian captivity, we went into the waters, we went into the ocean and made a year and a half journey all the way to a land which nobody lived in. You know, they're trying to say that we came from the Middle East to get to America. But the book of Esdras is trying to tell you that, you know, the Israelites did in fact live in America, but they're trying to say, oh no, they came from the Middle East. So that's why the book of Esdras is hijacked to try to mislead you. Oh, they're trying to tell you that the Israelites are in America because they got there from the Assyrian captivity in the Middle East. That's not true. It said that they crossed a river, which is the Mississippi. Let me prove it. This book is called The Journal of a 2-Month Tour in America. Page 41. It says that a king of their nation, where they formerly lived far to the west, that a king of their nation where they formerly lived far to the west, so they lived far to the west, left his kingdom to his 2 sons, that the one son making war upon the other, the latter thereupon determined to depart and seek some new habitation, that accordingly he set out accompanied by a number of his people, and that after wandering to and fro for a space of 40 years, they at length came to the Delaware River, where they settled 370 years ago. So a certain tribe of Indians who lived along the Delaware River, which we know is in Delaware on the East Coast, came from the west. They said their kingdom was on the west. And this is indeed an Israelite Hebrewistic tribe. Now, when we go to the book, The History of the American Indians by James Adair, he talks all throughout the book of how the Indians that he talked to were Hebrews, right? Now, another dude, Robert Williams, who was another spy among the Indians, this is what he had to say. Robert Williams, the first Englishman in New England, who said to have learned the Indian language in order to convert the natives, believed them to be Jews. Why do all these people believe them to be Jews? Because they did Israelite stuff. And he assures us that their tradition records that their ancestors came from the Southwest. So they didn't come from the Middle East. They came from the Southwest. All these tribes are saying they came from the West and they crossed a certain river. What river is that? The Mississippi. Come on. So they're telling you that their kingdom was on the West. That these Indians are not saying anything about coming from the East. These Indians are not saying anything about crossing the sea. These Indians are specifically saying they had to cross a river which y'all dried up. And they came from the West. They came from the West. It says, and that they returned there at death, that their women separate themselves from the rest of the people at certain periods, and that their language bore some affinity to the Hebrew. The Indians left the land because the land dried up. Joel is the youngest book, and the book of Joel talks about how the land is drying up because the children of Israel sins. They had to leave the land to get to the east because the east coast was fertile, had nice soil, and abundant in rivers. So they went to the east, and they stayed there to this day. To this day. And if you watching this video from Alabama, if you watching this video from North or South Carolina, if you watching this video from New York, if you watching this video from Mississippi, then you are their descendants. Now look, this is what Noah Webster had to say, bro. Noah Webster, the author of the most famous dictionary used in the English language, the Webster's Dictionary, he said this in 1828. He said, education is useless without the Bible. The Bible was America's basic textbook in all fields. Hold up. He said the Bible was America's basic textbook. He didn't say the Bible is America's basic text. He said the Bible was. Pay attention, because the country of America was only 48 years old, because this was in 1828, and the United States became a country in 1776. So this country was only 48 years old when he said this. So he's clearly not talking about, the United States. He's talking about America in general. He said the Bible is an American book. This is 1828. Remember, history was changed in 1846. People knew that this was the Holy Land back then. People knew that the Holy Land was in America back then, bro. People knew that. They had to distort and change history so the younger generation wouldn't know it, though. And to this day, people don't know it. That's why they're called pilgrims. Why was the first white people to come to America called pilgrims? What is a pilgrim? A pilgrim is a person on a sacred journey to a sacred place, to a holy place, to a religious place. If you're going to Mecca, what are you? You're a pilgrim. You're on a pilgrimage to Mecca. If you're going to Jerusalem, you're on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, right? So if a person is coming to America, why the F would they call themselves